Hey guys, tonight we begin with the curious, smoky, and half-forgotten world of medieval highs and herbal haze. The strange truth of every forgotten village, the quiet corner of history where monks, peasants, and healers could all float between reality and illusion together. It wasn't just a time of swords and sickness. It was where hallucinations, herbal medicine, laughter, and slow-burning madness all lived side by side under candlelight and fog. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from, and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together, into the mellow, bizarre, and sleepy world of what getting high was like in medieval times, and more. In the desolate heart of winter, the year 944 AD clung to the calendar like a desperate, frozen whisper, and within the isolated village of Oakhaven, life was a stoic, grinding rhythm of dawn-to-dusk toil, punctuated only by the gnawing ache of hunger and the pervasive chill. For weeks, the snow had laid a suffocating blanket upon the land, muting all sound, swallowing warmth, and turning the familiar world into an eerie expanse of white. The villagers, their faces etched with the lines of perpetual hardship, huddled closer to their meager hearths, their lives tethered to the simple promise of the next meal, the next loaf of rye bread. It was this bread, the coarse, dark staple milled from the hardy rye harvested before the deep freeze, that sustained them, a silent pact between man and earth. Elias, the village miller, a man whose hands were perpetually dusted with flour but whose eyes missed little, had felt a subtle unease as he ground the last of the autumn rye. A faint, almost imperceptible discoloration on some of the kernels, a purplish tinge amidst the healthy brown, had pricked at his meticulous nature. He'd dismissed it as merely a blight, a common enough affliction in a world where crops wrestled constantly with the whims of nature. He milled it all, as was his duty, for not a single grain could be wasted in Oakhaven. The subtle madness began as an insidious creep, a whisper of unease in the minds of the villagers, an undercurrent of strangeness beneath the stoic facade of their daily endurance. First, the dreams, vivid hallucinatory landscapes that twisted the mundane into grotesque carnival scenes, leaving sleepers restless, sweating, and disoriented upon waking. Then, the twitching. A nervous flutter in a hand during prayer, an uncontrollable tremor in a leg while stirring pottage, small, involuntary movements that initially sparked worried glances and hushed murmurs about ill humors or the beginnings of a fever. Little Thomas, barely 5, began to laugh at nothing, a high-pitched, unsettling giggle that echoed unnaturally within the quiet confines of their hovel, drawing confused stares from his mother Ilara, who herself felt a strange, restless energy thrumming beneath her skin. The elders, accustomed to the subtle signs of various ailments, muttered about the devil's dance or the fire sickness, for their limbs also began to prickle, to burn with an invisible heat, compelling them to twitch, to shift, to move. The village priest, Father Michael, his face already gaunt from the perpetual Lenten fast of winter, spoke of sin and repentance, his sermons growing more fervent, for he too felt the strange disquiet, mistaking it for the stirrings of divine judgment. Then came the day, a week into this creeping malaise, when the madness erupted into a public spectacle, tearing away the veil of normalcy with terrifying force. It began subtly enough during the mid-morning chore of drawing water from the frozen well. A young woman, usually demure, suddenly began to sway, her movements growing wider, more insistent, until she was not merely swaying but dancing, her feet stamping a wild, uncontrolled rhythm on the icy ground. Her eyes, wide and unnaturally bright, seemed fixed on something unseen, and a strange, forced laugh bubbled from her lips, soon morphing into a series of short, sharp yelps. Others, drawn by the commotion, found themselves strangely compelled, their own limbs twitching in involuntary sympathy, until they too began to move, jerkily at first, then with increasing abandon. Soon, an entire section of the village was caught in a horrifying, involuntary frenzy. Men, women, and even children, their faces a grotesque mask of forced hilarity or sheer terror, began dancing uncontrollably in the streets. Some shrieked with laughter, a high, desperate sound that grated on the nerves, while others screamed in unadulterated terror, their voices hoarse with exertion, trapped in a dance of their own bodies' betrayal. They spun, they leaped, they flailed, driven by an invisible tormentor that seized their muscles and twisted their wills. The air filled with the rasping sounds of their labored breathing, the thud of bare feet on frozen mud, and the terrifying symphony of their involuntary mirth and agony. Villagers collapsed from exhaustion, their limbs spasming even on the ground, their bodies racked with unbearable cramps, only to be trampled by those still caught in the dance, or to be dragged away, limp and insensible, by terrified onlookers who had thus far escaped the compulsion. It was pure, unadulterated chaos, a living nightmare played out under the cold, indifferent winter sky, a sight that would forever haunt the memories of those who witnessed it. No curse, no demon, no pestilence could explain such a collective, agonizing madness. Amidst the terror, Elias, the miller, watched, his hands gripping the rough wooden frame of his door, his flour-dusted face pale with a dawning, terrible realization. His mind, accustomed to logical processes of grain and water, recalled the discolored rye, the purplish kernels that had seemed so insignificant just weeks ago. He remembered the faint, earthy smell, different from healthy grain. This wasn't a curse. This wasn't the devil. This was something physical, something that had been consumed. His gaze swept over the writhing bodies, the foam at some lips, the terror in the eyes, and a name, whispered across the distant trade routes by traveling merchants, surfaced in his memory. St. Anthony's fire, the burning hallucinatory madness caused by ergot, a fungus that grew on rye, a fungus that acted like a poison, like LSD, twisting the mind and seizing the body. The bread. It had to be the bread. Their daily sustenance turned into their daily torment. He stumbled back inside, clutching his own stomach, a cold dread washing over him, realizing he, too, had consumed it. But then, a chilling question began to form in his mind, a whisper of suspicion colder than the deepest winter. The blight had been on some kernels, yes, but was it enough to cause such a widespread, concentrated outbreak? And why had old man Tiber, the cunning, ruthless hoarder of the village, looked so strangely well, his eyes clear, his movements steady, even as his own family members writhed in the streets? Tiber, who always knew how to secure the best, untouched grain, who never seemed to suffer the common afflictions. The image of Tiber, calm amidst the chaos, remained etched in Elias's mind even as the dancing sickness eventually passed, leaving behind a village decimated not by death, but by a chilling memory and broken trust. Many had collapsed from exhaustion, succumbing to the violent cramps and hallucinations. Some had died from the sheer physical strain, their weakened hearts giving out. Those who recovered were left with lingering tremors, profound memory gaps, and a deep, unspoken trauma. The rye bread, the source of their sustenance, was now synonymous with terror. The priest, Father Michael, bewildered by the medical explanation, returned to his spiritual duties, attributing the recovery to divine intervention after fervent prayers, but never fully grasping the insidious poison. The question, however, remained, gnawing at Elias like a hungry rat. Was it accidental, or used deliberately by someone? He remembered the few unusual sacks of grain Tiber had secured after the initial milling, grain that Tiber had claimed was superior and untainted, conspicuously absent from the mill during the main harvest. Had Tiber somehow diverted the blighted grain to the communal stores, ensuring his own family's safety while profiting from the desperate need for bread? Or worse, had he intentionally cultivated or selected the infected rye, knowing its terrifying effects, perhaps to destabilize the village, to gain advantage, to break the spirit of his rivals, to gain more land cheaply as families collapsed? Elias had no proof, only a terrible, cold suspicion. The fear of ergot poisoning, of the dancing madness, became a new, pervasive dread in Oakhaven, forever tainting the bread, the very staff of life. The village recovered slowly, physically, but the psychological scars remained, a pervasive paranoia. Every strange look, every unusual illness, every unexplained misfortune, now carried the terrifying echo of that question, whispering through the quiet homes, through the desolate streets, twisting every trust. Was it natural, Or was it a deliberate poison? And Elias, the miller, forever bore the chilling secret, the unspoken question that haunted his every waking hour, a suspicion that perhaps, even in their desperate attempts to survive, one of their own had used the very bread that sustained them as a weapon against their peace, leaving an indelible stain of doubt on the very fabric of their communal lives, a loop of terrifying uncertainty that would never truly resolve itself. The ancient stones of the monastery, steeped in centuries of fervent prayer and austere discipline, usually held only the echoes of solemn chants and the quiet scuff of sandaled feet. Yet, on that particular unforgettable night in the cold heart of winter, a different kind of hush fell over the cloistered halls, a breathless, awestruck silence that drew the monks from their cells like moths to an unseen flame. Whispers, reverent and terrified, spread like wildfire through the shadowed corridors, coalescing around the locked door of Brother Thomas's secluded meditation chamber. Inside, through a tiny crack in the heavy oak, a spectacle unfolded that defied the very laws of God and man. Brother Thomas, a monk known for his unwavering piety and profound asceticism, was seen meditating in a dark chamber filled with thick, strange-smelling smoke. And before the astonished eyes of those who dared to peer, a sight of impossible wonder unfolded. Witnesses claimed he rose from the ground, hovering, suspended in the swirling haze, defying gravity for hours on end. When, finally, he descended, weak and trembling but seemingly bathed in an otherworldly glow, he claimed angels had lifted him, transporting him to celestial realms. The monastery buzzed with a mix of terrified reverence and fervent belief, convinced they had witnessed a true miracle, a testament to God's boundless grace and Brother Thomas's unparalleled sanctity. Yet, beneath the ecstatic pronouncements and the pious awe, a colder, more methodical curiosity began to stir in the mind of Father Benedict, the monastery's infirmarian, a man of quiet observation and practical knowledge of herbs and ailments. He couldn't shake the memory of the smoke's peculiar odor, a scent familiar from the infirmary's remedies, yet unsettling in its intensity. He wondered. Later, it was discovered he'd burned dried henbane and mandrake root. Were they drugs, or something else? The question gnawed at him, casting a shadow of doubt over the miraculous. The chamber itself was a small, unadorned cell, usually devoid of anything but a straw mat and a crucifix. But on that night, it had been transformed into a swirling vortex of sensory experience. The dark chamber, normally a space for quiet contemplation, became a stage for an unholy spectacle of spiritual ecstasy or profound delusion. The thick, strange-smelling smoke had permeated every corner, clinging to the heavy air, swirling around Brother Thomas's still form. Father Benedict, upon cautiously entering the chamber after Brother Thomas's descent, had detected a complex, unsettling aroma, earthy and acrid, with a sickly sweet undertone, reminiscent of bitter almonds and something vaguely narcotic. It was the scent of certain potent herbs, used with extreme caution in small doses in the infirmary for pain or sedatives, but never in such suffocating concentration. He knew that the atmosphere alone could induce powerful sensations, affecting the very perception of reality. The key to Brother Thomas's levitation lay precisely in the discovery of what he had burned. Dried henbane, Hyoscyamus niger, and mandrake root, Mandragora officinarum, were not mere incense. They were both powerful, highly toxic plants with a long history in European folklore and medicine, deeply steeped in associations with witchcraft, magic, and altered states of consciousness. Both contain potent psychoactive alkaloids, particularly tropane alkaloids like hyoscyamine, scopolamine, and atropine. When ingested, or more acutely, when their fumes are inhaled, these compounds act as deliriants and hallucinogens. They can induce vivid, realistic hallucinations, a profound sense of disorientation, a feeling of weightlessness or extreme lightness, and a distortion of one's own body image. A person under their influence might genuinely believe they are floating, flying, or conversing with celestial beings, all while their body remains physically grounded. The visions Brother Thomas experienced, of angels lifting him, of journeys to heavenly realms, were textbook effects of such compounds. The profound confusion they induced could lead to a genuine conviction that the experience was divine, not drug-induced. The question then sharpens: were they drugs, or something else? To the medieval mind, the distinction was far less clear than it is to us. There was no scientific understanding of neurochemistry. A substance that altered perception, induced visions, or caused strange bodily sensations might indeed be seen as a conduit to the spiritual realm, a tool to bypass earthly limitations and communicate with angels or demons. So, for Brother Thomas, who clearly sought spiritual enlightenment and a closer connection to God through his rigorous asceticism, burning these potent herbs might not have been an act of drug abuse in the modern sense. It could have been a desperate, misguided attempt at spiritual transcendence, a self-experimentation with perceived holy smoke to achieve a heightened state of prayer or mystical vision, genuinely believing he was opening himself to divine influence. He might have seen the powerful effects not as side effects of a chemical, but as direct evidence of God's touch, or the literal presence of angels. This belief in chemically induced spirituality was not unique. Various cultures have used psychoactive plants in religious rituals for millennia. However, the something else also carried a darker implication. Was there a deliberate manipulation at play, beyond just self-experimentation? Had Brother Thomas, in his zeal, sought knowledge from forbidden texts or whispered lore about powerful, dangerous herbs? Or was he, perhaps, being influenced by a hidden agenda? The monastic world, despite its piety, was not immune to rivalries, ambitions, or subtle corruptions. Had anyone encouraged his spiritual endeavors, knowing the true nature of the smoke? Or did he, in his desire for greater sanctity, unknowingly stumble upon a path that blurred the lines between the divine and the diabolical? The sheer intensity of the experience, the public witnessing of the miracle, certainly enhanced the monastery's reputation, potentially bringing in more pilgrims and donations. Could there have been an underlying, more cynical motive by someone else to encourage this miracle for the monastery's gain? Father Benedict, with his quiet knowledge of herbs, would have recognized the immense danger. Henbane and mandrake were poisons, capable of causing delirium, convulsions, coma, and even death, especially in high concentrations or enclosed spaces. The physical toll on Brother Thomas, weak and trembling after his experience, was a clear sign of toxicity, not divine grace. Father Benedict would have grappled with a profound dilemma. To expose the truth was to shatter a perceived miracle, to undermine faith, and potentially to condemn Brother Thomas as a charlatan or worse, a practitioner of forbidden arts. Yet, to remain silent was to allow a dangerous deception to persist, potentially encouraging others to experiment with deadly substances in pursuit of false visions. The monastery, an institution that upheld truth and divine order, was now faced with a phenomenon that was either a miracle or a dangerous delusion, with dire implications for its integrity. The truth, hidden in the billowing smoke, was far more complex and unsettling than a simple miracle or mere drug use. It touched upon the very nature of belief, the desperate human search for transcendence, and the perilous path one might take when the boundaries of understanding are so profoundly limited. In conclusion, the fascinating account of the monk who floated for hours in a dark chamber filled with thick, strange-smelling smoke, witnessed by monks who claimed he rose from the ground, and accepted by Brother Thomas as an act of angels, is a potent illustration of how historical realities defy modern categorization. The subsequent discovery that he'd burned dried henbane and mandrake root compels us to ask, were they simply drugs, or something else? To the medieval mind, these powerful hallucinogenic plants were conduits to altered states that blurred the lines between chemical effect and spiritual revelation. This enduring mystery highlights the desperate human search for transcendence, the profound influence of unscientific beliefs, and the terrifying fine line between religious ecstasy, profound psychological delusion, and the real-world dangers of botanical poisons in a world where answers were sought not in chemistry, but in the divine or the diabolical. The late afternoon sun, a bruised purple orb sinking behind the skeletal trees of the Schwarzwald, cast long, distorted shadows across the tiny, isolated cottage on the forest's edge. Young Greta, barely 12 winters old, moved with a strange, almost ethereal grace through the twilight, her movements unusually deliberate for a girl her age. Her hands, surprisingly deft, were not occupied with fetching water or mending worn garments, but with rubbing a strange ointment onto her skin, particularly at her pulse points, her temples, and behind her ears. The air, already thick with the damp scent of pine and decaying leaves, grew heavy with a peculiar earthy aroma emanating from the salve, a complex fragrance that hinted at bitter herbs and something else, something both alluring and deeply unsettling. A local hunter, known for his keen eye and even keener curiosity, had seen her, a fleeting shadow against the fading light, engaged in this odd ritual before she slipped back into the cottage. He'd shaken his head, dismissing it as child's play, or perhaps a harmless folk remedy for aches, but the image lingered, a subtle discord in the familiar harmony of the forest. The night deepened, bringing with it the pervasive cold and the usual sounds of the wilderness, but from Greta's humble dwelling, a different kind of quiet descended, a hush that seemed to hold its breath. When questioned the next morning by her distraught mother, who found her daughter pale, exhausted, yet strangely radiant, Greta, her eyes still holding a faraway glint, made a breathtaking, impossible claim. She said she flew through the night. Not in dreams, she insisted, but truly, soaring above the tallest pines, a silent witness to the sleeping world below. Her mother, terrified, attributed it to a fever-induced delirium, or perhaps the dark whisperings of forest spirits, forcing Greta to swear on the Holy Cross that she would never speak of such wild fancies again. But the image of the girl, so fervent in her belief, so utterly convinced of her nocturnal aerial journey, remained, a chilling anomaly in the rigid fabric of their superstitious world. Centuries later, a small, preserved vial of a similar salve, unearthed near the ruins of a much older, forgotten settlement deep within those very woods, was meticulously analyzed. Its contents sent a shiver through the scientific community. The ointment contained deadly nightshade, atropa belladonna, and other potent hallucinogens, including henbane and mandrake root, substances known to induce vivid, often terrifying, out-of-body experiences and profound sensory distortions. This revelation solved one mystery. Greta's flight was indeed a drug-induced hallucination, a journey of the mind, not the body. But here's the truly unsettling part, the core of the enduring enigma. How did she know the recipe, and why didn't she die? The plants themselves, deadly nightshade, henbane, mandrake, were well known in medieval folklore and rudimentary medicine, but primarily as potent poisons. Their berries, roots, and leaves, when ingested, caused violent delirium, convulsions, coma, and often agonizing death. To handle them, let alone prepare them into a topical ointment, required immense knowledge and precision. Peasants were acutely aware of the dangers of such plants. They were the very definition of witches' herbs, their power feared and respected. So, how did a young, seemingly innocent forest girl acquire such esoteric and dangerous botanical knowledge? It suggested a hidden lineage, a secret tradition passed down through generations, perhaps from an isolated ancestor. A solitary herbalist, or a figure on the fringes of society often associated with forbidden practices. Was she taught by an old woman of the woods, a village outcast, or even a hidden coven of practitioners who guarded ancient pagan knowledge that predated the austere doctrines of the Church? The existence of such a precise recipe, one that bypassed the digestive system to be absorbed through the skin, implied sophisticated, empirical experimentation. A quiet, dangerous science passed down through whispered words and clandestine rites, utterly outside the formal learning of the era. The very act of preparing it, of handling these toxic plants, suggested an initiation into a forbidden knowledge, a connection to a world that the village, steeped in Christian piety, fiercely condemned. But the most profound and terrifying part of the mystery remained. Why didn't she die? The alkaloids in deadly nightshade and its botanical cousins are profoundly toxic. Even topical application carries immense risk, as the skin readily absorbs such compounds. A slight miscalculation in concentration, a moment too long in preparation, or an accidental ingestion could have resulted in a swift, agonizing end. Yet, Greta survived, not just once, but seemingly multiple times, strong enough to claim flights through the night. This points to an almost impossibly precise formula, a meticulous understanding of dosage, absorption rates, and perhaps even individual tolerance. Knowledge that seems far beyond the scope of chance experimentation by an uneducated child. Was there a specific preparation method, a detoxifying agent, or a ritualistic countermeasure incorporated into the recipe that mitigated its lethal potential? Or was it something more chilling? A selection process, a resilience in Greta's own physiology that allowed her to dance with death and emerge, not unscathed, but alive? The lack of death also hints at the possibility that the purpose of the salve was not to kill, but specifically to induce this altered state, implying a deliberate, controlled application of a dangerous substance for a specific, non-lethal outcome. Perhaps the teacher had such mastery over these poisons that they could administer a precise, non-fatal dose, a feat that borders on the miraculous given the imprecise measurements of the medieval world. The enduring mystery of Greta and her flying salve thus intertwines natural science with the profound fear and wonder of the medieval mind. It challenges our assumptions about their understanding of the world, suggesting pockets of empirical knowledge, however dangerous, that existed outside the official realms of medicine and theology. It raises unsettling questions about the nature of ancient folk practices, the hidden lines of transmission for forbidden knowledge, and the profound human desire for transcendence, even if it meant dancing on the precipice of death. Was Greta merely a child experimenting with frightening plants, blessed by sheer luck? Or was she a link in an unbroken chain of ancient wisdom, a recipient of a dangerous secret passed down through generations, allowing her to touch the edges of the supernatural and return? The silence of the Schwarzwald holds its secrets close, but the ghostly echoes of a small girl, claiming flight, and the chilling truth of the poisons she rubbed into her skin, leave a lingering doubt, a tantalizing question that floats through the centuries, as elusive and unsettling as the strange-smelling smoke that once filled her dark chamber. The chill that perpetually clung to the ancient stones of Lord Alaric's bedchamber was no match for the consuming fire of his nightly ritual. Lord Alaric, a nobleman whose land stretched wide but whose spirit felt perpetually confined, had long sought escape from the gilded cage of his monotonous existence. His days were a dull tapestry of accounts, petty grievances, and forced pleasantries, his nights often restless, haunted by the quiet ambition he dared not speak. It was this gnawing hunger for something more, something beyond the mundane, that had led him to a secluded, nameless apothecary nestled deep within the city's most shadowed alleys. This ancient, furtive purveyor of strange concoctions had offered him a singular, forbidden key to other realms. A powder, dark and granular, derived, the apothecary whispered, from the dried skin of a rare, luminous toad found only in the deepest, most primordial swamps. This was the toad that made men see the devil. Alaric's transformation began subtly. Each night, after his servants had retired and the castle settled into its uneasy slumber, he would light a single tallow candle in his chamber, its flickering flame casting dancing shadows that seemed to stretch and writhe in anticipation. From a small, intricately carved wooden box, he would extract a pinch of the dark powder, placing it carefully onto a heated metal plate or into a crude, clay pipe. As the heat touched the substance, a thin, acrid plume of strange-smelling smoke would coil upwards, filling the confined space with an aroma both earthy and vaguely metallic, yet strangely alluring. He would inhale deeply, the smoke rasping in his throat, and wait. The initial moments were always a disorienting swirl of dizziness and nausea, a brief descent into physical discomfort. Then, the world would begin to shift. Colors deepened, sounds sharpened, and the very air around him seemed to pulse with an unseen energy. His first journeys were breathtaking. He would lie on his velvet-draped bed, his body feeling both heavy and impossibly light, as images flooded his mind with astonishing clarity. He saw fleeting glimpses of faces unknown yet intensely familiar, heard fragments of languages long dead, felt echoes of emotions that transcended his own lived experience. Users claimed to see their past lives, and Alaric became convinced he was peering through the veil of time, witnessing himself as a Roman legionary, a forgotten Egyptian priestess, a Viking raider. The boredom of his noble life evaporated, replaced by a thrilling voyage into the depths of forgotten history and possible reincarnation. These initial visions were intoxicating, a balm to his restless spirit, offering a profound sense of meaning and connection that his earthly existence entirely lacked. He devoured the experience, pushing further, convinced he was on the cusp of unlocking ancient wisdom, of truly understanding the very fabric of existence. The apothecary had been right. This toad held profound secrets. But as Alaric's obsession deepened, the benign wonder of those first visions began to curdle. One nobleman used it every night, the lines between his waking life and his nightly journeys blurring into a dangerous, indistinguishable haze. The powder, once a key to past lives, became a master, demanding his attention, consuming his every thought. The visions grew more intense, more vivid, and terrifyingly, more malevolent. The serene faces of ancient selves began to distort, twisting into grotesque grimaces, their voices whispering curses instead of wisdom. The landscapes of forgotten eras turned into infernal realms, filled with shadow creatures and agonizing screams. Then came the shift, the chilling turning point. The visions of past lives began to recede, replaced by a single recurring image that clawed at his sanity: the devil's face. It was not a theological abstraction, but a viscerally real, terrifying presence, its eyes burning with ancient malice, its silent gaze promising damnation. Alaric would thrash on his bed, muttering desperate prayers, his body slick with cold sweat even as a feverish heat consumed him. His once regal composure began to fray. Servants noticed the dark circles under his eyes, the gauntness of his face, the increasing paranoia in his whispers. He dismissed their concerns, attributing his deterioration to intense spiritual meditation, but their knowing glances and hushed murmurs about forbidden practices spread through the castle. The line between spiritual enlightenment and a descent into madness became indistinguishable. On a particular night, colder and darker than usual, Lord Alaric performed his ritual one last time. He ordered his chamber secured, allowing no one near. The familiar, thick, strange-smelling smoke billowed from his censer, filling the sealed room with its acrid, hallucinogenic perfume. The last flicker of the tallow candle dimmed, succumbing to the overwhelming haze. He inhaled deeply, inviting the visions, daring the devil's face to appear, convinced he could master it, extract its ultimate secrets. The long, terrifying night passed in silent, unseen agony or ecstasy. When morning light finally struggled through the heavy snow-laden windows, Lord Alaric did not rise. His bed, meticulously made, lay empty. His chamber, though secured from the inside, was strangely undisturbed. There were no signs of struggle, no overturned furniture, no broken objects. The silence of the room was absolute, a profound void where a man had been. He vanished in his sleep. Panic erupted. Servants, after repeated unanswered calls, forced open the heavy chamber door. The bed was empty, the sheets undisturbed, cool to the touch. Every corner of the room was searched, every tapestry pulled aside, every hidden recess scrutinized. The alarm spread through the castle, sparking a frantic, desperate search. Guards scoured every hall, every dungeon, every secret passage. They searched the grounds, braving the deep snow and the freezing winds, convinced he must have somehow stumbled out in a fit of delirium. The river was dragged, the surrounding forests scoured. But Lord Alaric was gone. No body was ever found. The castle buzzed with terrified speculation. A kidnapping? Demonic snatching? A miracle gone wrong? The priest muttered about souls lost to unholy arts. The physicians, mystified by his sudden disappearance, attributed it to divine judgment for unknown sins. Days later, amidst the meticulous search of his private chamber, a servant, pushing aside a small stool near the empty hearth, noticed something chilling. There, on the stone floor, lay the crude, clay-toed jar. It was small, unremarkable, but as the servant reached for it, a gasp caught in her throat. The jar, strangely, was still warm. It radiated a faint, lingering heat, as if the contents had only just been consumed or had emitted some strange energy. The dark residue within suggested recent use. This was the sole, tangible clue left behind, a silent, mocking testament to his final, unseen act. The toad jar, still warm, in an empty room, with no trace of the nobleman who had held it moments before his vanishing. The mystery deepened, twisting into an unsolvable enigma that haunted the castle for decades. Had the toad venom, pushed to its limits, dissolved his very being, transporting him to the hellish realms he had so frequently glimpsed? Had the devil's face he sought in his visions finally reached out from the hallucinatory abyss and dragged him into its own dimension? Or was it something far more mundane, a carefully orchestrated disappearance, a secret escape executed under the perfect cover of a drug-induced hallucination, leaving behind a cold, warm clue to baffle the superstitious? The toad jar, still warm, remained a chilling paradox, a physical link to an impossible vanishing, whispering of boundaries broken and a fate utterly beyond explanation, forever haunted by the specter of the nobleman who had sought to see the devil, and perhaps succeeded. The sleepy town of Oakhaven, nestled deep within a verdant valley, usually slumbered under the benevolent gaze of its ancient church, its rhythm dictated by the turning seasons and the quiet hum of peasant life. But for generations, a peculiar tradition had woven itself into the fabric of their existence, stirring to life only when the heavens performed their most awe-inspiring and terrifying celestial dance, the eclipse. During these moments, the villagers would gather in hushed anticipation, not for prayer alone, but for a ritual steeped in whispers of foresight and ancient lore. They brewed seer's tea, a concoction passed down through forgotten centuries, a drink made from specific mountain herbs, usually a mild infusion that offered a gentle sense of calm or perhaps a fleeting, pleasant dream on an ordinary night. The preparation was meticulous, the brewing done in silence, the steam curling upwards like tendrils of unspoken hopes and fears. The drink, normally innocuous, was consumed with a mix of reverence and a childlike curiosity, mostly as a communal comfort, a shared superstitious act to ward off the disquiet that shadows cast upon the sun or moon evoked in their pre-scientific world. Then came the eclipse of 944 AD, a celestial event of profound darkness that swallowed the sun whole, plunging the midday world into an eerie, unnatural twilight. As the moon began its slow, inexorable journey across the sun's fiery face, a palpable dread descended upon Oakhaven. The villagers, gathered in their homes, clutching their steaming mugs of seer's tea, felt the air grow heavy, charged with an unholy stillness. And as the moon went dark, as the last sliver of sunlight vanished and the corona flared like a ghostly halo, the gentle warmth of the tea transmuted into something terrifyingly potent. The visions came. They weren't pleasant dreams or vague omens. They were stark, piercing, and terrifyingly accurate, personal, terrifying in their clarity. Old Man Tiber, notorious for his shrewdness, choked on his tea as he saw his prized winter wheat fields consumed by a flash flood, a future that would lead to famine in his own meager storehouse, even as the sky outside held no hint of storm. A young mother, humming a lullaby to her child, saw her beloved husband's face twisted in agony, felled by a bandit's blade on a distant road he had yet to travel. The serenity of the communal ritual shattered, replaced by gasps, muffled cries, and the quiet horror of lives laid bare by an undeniable future. The tea, transformed by the celestial darkness, had become a conduit not just to vision, but to raw, unvarnished prophecy, stealing away the comforting veil of ignorance. The power of the visions, both compelling and horrifying, became an addiction for some. After witnessing the accuracy of the first eclipse and seeing its grim predictions unfold in the subsequent months, the specific flood, the particular bandit attack on the trade road, a desperate hunger for foreknowledge gripped a few, particularly those who faced imminent threats or harbored secret ambitions. When the next eclipse was predicted, 2 years later, these few, more daring or more desperate than the others, sought out the herbs for a second brew. The ritual was repeated, the visions came again, terrifyingly precise, confirming their fears or revealing new, equally grim destinies. They found themselves utterly unable to resist the pull of this forbidden insight, convinced that armed with knowledge, however painful, they could somehow avert their predetermined fates. But there was a chilling price. After the third brew, attempted by a handful of individuals consumed by their desperate thirst for insight or control, a terrifying pattern emerged. These users never woke up. Their bodies lay still in their beds, peaceful as if in a deep slumber, but their breaths never stirred again. No apparent cause of death, no visible signs of struggle or violence, just a permanent, profound slumber from which they would never awaken. The phenomenon sent a fresh wave of terror through Oakhaven, a chilling counterpoint to the relief of surviving the eclipse itself. The tea, a portal to knowledge, had become a one-way gate to the grave, its third cup a silent, irreversible judgment. The deaths were inexplicable to their primitive medical knowledge, baffling even to Father Michael, who, like the rest of his flock, attributed the visions to unholy intervention. The Church, already wary of folk magic and superstitious practices, saw the tea's terrifying power and the subsequent deaths as irrefutable proof of demonic influence. Its pronouncements thundered down from the pulpit. This seer's tea was an abomination, a direct challenge to God's will, a dangerous dabbling in forbidden arts that condemned both body and soul. Local authorities, swayed by the Church's immense power and their own fear, tried to ban it, sending out patrols to search homes, ordering all known herbs for the tea to be gathered and burned in terrifying public pyres, and threatening severe punishment, excommunication, even the stake, for anyone caught brewing or consuming it. The terror of the Church's wrath, coupled with the chilling precedent of the third brew, seemed to extinguish the practice in Oakhaven. The communal ceremony vanished, replaced by a lingering, fearful silence around the topic of eclipses. Yet, whispers, like tendrils of mist, clung to the shadows. Despite the Church's fervent efforts to eradicate the knowledge and the practice, a chilling secret persisted, passed down not through spoken words but through hushed glances and knowing silences. It was said that a hidden branch of an ancient order, located deep within the remote mountains, within the heavily fortified walls of a particular, isolated monastery, still cultivated the rare herbs needed for the tea. This was not a place of simple faith, but of rigorous scholarship, quiet contemplation, and perhaps a dangerous thirst for forbidden knowledge. Why did they continue to use it? Was it for the pursuit of divine insight, daring to commune with celestial forces through a forbidden medium? Did they believe it was a way to truly understand death, to prepare for its inevitable arrival by glimpsing it directly? Or did they seek to gain a terrifying control over knowledge itself, using the tea not just for prophecy, but for some darker, unholy purpose that remained hidden from the world? The mystery of the third brew and its final, permanent slumber haunted the minds of those few who knew, a chilling testament to the tea's power. And so, even as the fear of the seer's tea faded into legend in the sleepy valley, the cold truth endured. But one monastery still uses it. The knowledge of the deadly brew, the visions of terror, and the unanswered question of that final, irreversible slumber continued to exist, guarded within stone walls, patiently awaiting the next eclipse, its secrets held by monks who dared to walk the terrifying line between faith and fatal curiosity. The early spring air in the secluded valley usually carried the sweet scent of thawing earth and new growth, a gentle promise after the harshness of winter. But in the hushed, forgotten corners of the world, away from the prying eyes of lords and priests, a different aroma began to permeate the twilight during a very specific time each year, a scent both intoxicating and terrifying. The thick, acrid perfume of burning herbs mingled with the faint, metallic tang of fear. This was the prelude to the festival of smoke and screams, a secret, unspeakable ritual that unfolded under the cloak of night, a descent into a chaos that shattered the boundaries of sanity and often consumed those who dared to enter. Every spring, in secret, people gathered wearing white masks. These weren't masks of celebration, adorned with feathers or paint, but simple, featureless shrouds of white cloth, crudely cut to conceal identity, to erase the individual, turning every participant into a faceless specter ready to lose themselves in the unfolding horror. The act of donning the mask was the first step across a terrifying threshold, a silent agreement to surrender their identity, their inhibitions, and perhaps their very soul to the unseen forces that governed the festival. As twilight bled into oppressive darkness, the air grew thick and heavy, not just with the chill of the night, but with the omnipresent haze of smoke that filled the air. This wasn't merely the smoke of hearth fires. It was a strange, potent concoction, perhaps from the very same hallucinogenic herbs like henbane and mandrake root that had once made a monk float or caused a forest girl to fly. Its tendrils curled through the crowd, stinging eyes and lungs, subtly altering perceptions, blurring the edges of reality before the true rituals even began. The world became a shifting, distorted landscape, where figures moved like phantoms and familiar sounds transmuted into eerie echoes. From this swirling haze, a peculiar, disquieting sound began to emanate. Music played with no rhythm. It was not the structured melodies of celebration, or the comforting cadence of folk songs. Instead, it was a cacophony of discordant pipes, frantic drums, and guttural chanting, a primal, unsettling din that bypassed the rational mind and struck directly at the raw nerves of the soul. The absence of rhythm was deliberate, designed to disorient, to dismantle the internal clock, to pull participants out of their conscious minds and deeper into a state of heightened suggestibility and raw emotion, preparing them for the descent into the unspeakable. And then, as the smoke thickened and the arrhythmic music pulsed around them, the true purpose of the festival began to unfold, a terrifying release of pent-up human emotion. People wept, their sobs raw and uncontrolled, tears streaming down behind their white masks, perhaps releasing years of silent grief, unacknowledged suffering, or the crushing weight of a life lived in constant hardship. These weren't quiet, polite tears. They were primal laments, expressions of profound despair. Simultaneously, and with a horrifying abruptness, others began to laugh, a sound that grated on the nerves, high-pitched and hysterical, devoid of genuine mirth. It was the laughter of madness, of terror, of a spirit pushed beyond its breaking point, mirroring the forced, unsettling mirth of the ergot-poisoned villagers years ago. The air was filled with this chilling duality. The wails of despair intertwined with the shrieks of hysterical laughter, creating a disturbing symphony of human anguish and fractured sanity. Amidst this emotional maelstrom, individuals began to confess sins, their voices hoarse and trembling, whispering dark secrets into the swirling smoke, confessing acts of betrayal, lust, or forbidden thoughts that they would never dare utter in the light of day. It was a terrifying, communal purging, facilitated by the hallucinogenic smoke and the disorienting sounds, a desperate attempt to unburden their souls before an unseen, unspoken judgment. But the most terrifying aspect of the Festival of Smoke and Screams was its chilling finality for many participants. As the night reached its crescendo of unhinged emotion and psychedelic chaos, individuals, one by one, seemed to simply disappear. They would drift into the thickest plumes of smoke, wander off into the shadows beyond the firelight, or simply vanish from the frantic dance circles, their absence unnoticed amidst the pervasive confusion and emotional overwhelm. These were not always willing departures. The disappearances were sudden, unexplained, leaving a void that was quickly filled by the next weeping or laughing form. The sheer anonymity provided by the white masks, the disorienting smoke, and the chaotic, arrhythmic music ensured that no one could accurately track who left, who remained, or who was taken. Only half ever returned home when the first pale light of dawn reluctantly pierced the dissipating smoke, their bodies often exhausted, their minds fragmented, their masks clutched tightly in their numb hands. They carried the lingering scent of strange herbs, the echo of terrifying sounds, and the profound silence of what they had witnessed. And those who did return, their eyes haunted, their faces pale beneath the smudges of soot, never spoke of what they saw. The unspoken vow, sealed by terror and trauma, ensured the festival's secrets remained inviolable, perpetuating its horrifying mystery. The underlying purpose of this brutal ritual remains shrouded in conjecture. Was it a desperate, ancient form of psychological release for a populace constantly oppressed by disease, famine, and feudal lords? Was it a pagan survival, a dark rite to appease unknown deities or to ward off unseen evils by sacrificing sanity? Or was it more sinister, a ritual orchestrated by a hidden cult or a powerful malevolent force within the community, using the cover of tradition to eliminate rivals, settle scores, or perform unspeakable sacrifices, knowing that the witnesses would be too traumatized, too confused, or too afraid to ever speak? The silence of those who returned, the chilling knowledge they carried, ensured the cycle would repeat, drawing new, desperate souls into the terrifying vortex of the smoke and screams each spring, a stark reminder of humanity's capacity for both profound suffering and terrifying, inexplicable rituals in a world where chaos was a constant companion. The constant, thin wail of the baby was a familiar, heartbreaking soundtrack to life in the medieval hovel, a relentless echo of hunger, cold, and the pervasive discomfort that defined existence in the year 1348. Little Ilara's mother, her own body perpetually weary from unending toil and the gnawing ache of scarcity, cradled the infant, a frail bundle whose cries seemed to pierce the very fabric of her soul. This was not the demanding wail of a robust child, but a fragile, desperate lament, laced with the brittle edge of persistent discomfort that no meager meal or worn blanket seemed to quell. The infant, too young to even grasp its name, Thomas, after its older brother, was inconsolable. Days bled into nights, and the cries continued, a torment to the exhausted parents, whose own sleep was a fragmented, fear-haunted affair, and a source of quiet anxiety for the entire household, for a constantly crying baby often foretold a swift, grim end in their unforgiving world. Desperation, a cold, relentless hand, tightened its grip on Ilara's mother, pushing her beyond the limits of her endurance. She had tried every conventional folk remedy: warm milk, gentle rocking, murmured lullabies, even the desperate, superstitious placement of an onion beneath the straw bed, hoping to ward off unseen evils. Nothing worked. Then, a whispered suggestion from an old, knowing woman in the village, a reclusive figure who dealt in strange roots and forgotten lore, offered a desperate glimmer of hope. She spoke of a soothing herb, a dried sprig with tiny, shriveled leaves and a faint, earthy aroma, one that could bring peace to restless spirits and quiet the most persistent wails. It was a remedy passed down from her grandmother, she claimed, to soothe teething pains or dispel night terrors in infants. With trembling hands, Ilara's mother accepted the small, brittle offering, her heart a tangled knot of hope and apprehension. She crushed a tiny fragment of the herb, as instructed, mixing it into a spoonful of warm gruel, and gently spoon-fed it to the wailing infant. The baby, momentarily surprised by the unfamiliar taste, swallowed it without resistance. The change was immediate and utterly chilling. The cries ceased. A profound, unnatural silence descended upon the hovel, so sudden and absolute it made the parents' breath catch in their throats. Then, a small, tentative sound emerged from the infant's lips, a soft gurgle that quickly swelled into a bubbling, insistent chuckle. Moments later, the baby laughed. The sound, initially a source of immense, overwhelming relief, quickly transformed into a chilling symphony of terror. The baby continued to laugh. It wasn't the joyous, spontaneous gurgle of delight that melts a mother's heart, but a peculiar, continuous, almost forced sound, devoid of mirth. It was a high-pitched, unceasing giggle, punctuated by shallow, rapid breaths, its small chest heaving with a continuous effort. The infant's eyes, wide and unnaturally bright, seemed to stare intently at unseen figures, its tiny head sometimes snapping abruptly towards an empty corner, its gaze fixed on an invisible horror or an incomprehensible wonder. The laughter, unending and utterly devoid of context, filled the small hut, bouncing off the rough-hewn walls, vibrating through the sparse straw, infiltrating every crevice of their sanity. Minutes stretched into hours. The laughter did not stop. Ilara's mother, her initial relief curdling into profound dread, tried everything to stop it, rocking, shushing, nursing, even gently shaking the child. Nothing worked. The laughter continued, relentless, mechanical, a torturous sound that grated on their nerves, eating away at their sleep. The constant, unceasing mirth began to consume the baby's energy. Its tiny face grew flushed, its body trembling with exertion, but still the laughter poured forth. And it didn't stop for 2 days. 2 sunrises bled into 2 relentless sunsets, each hour a fresh descent into a living nightmare. The hovel became a place of profound disquiet, its unsettling symphony audible to the neighbors, who whispered darkly about curses, about demons, about an infant touched by malevolent spirits. Father Michael, the village priest, was summoned, his face etched with concern. He performed blessings, sprinkled holy water, and muttered fervent prayers of exorcism. But the baby's laughter simply bubbled on, mocking his holy rituals with its unceasing, unholy mirth. The mother, hollow-eyed and desperate from lack of sleep and overwhelming fear, rocked her laughing child, her mind teetering on the brink of despair. What demon had taken root in her innocent child? What unseen horror was it witnessing that compelled such unending, terrifying hilarity? The physical toll on the infant was immense. It barely nursed, its tiny body growing weaker, thinner, sustained only by the involuntary spasms of its diaphragm. The laughter was consuming its very life force. In a desperate, final attempt to understand, or perhaps to simply seek any solution, Ilara's father, a practical man despite the village's superstitions, sought out Father Benedict, the monastery's infirmarian. He knew the monk possessed a quiet, empirical understanding of herbs, having seen him apply remedies that often succeeded where prayers alone failed. He presented a small, carefully wrapped portion of the dried herb to the infirmarian, recounting the horrifying tale of the unending laughter. Father Benedict, a man of quiet observation, recognized the herb, a faint flicker of concern crossing his stoic face. He took it away to his small, ordered infirmary, where he meticulously examined it, consulting ancient texts, comparing its appearance and subtle scent to other known botanical specimens. His grim discovery brought a chilling clarity to the terrifying mystery. When the herb was tested, it wasn't for children at all. It was a potent, dangerous plant, an extremely powerful psychoactive substance, far too potent for an infant's delicate system. It belonged to the same family of deadly nightshade, henbane, and mandrake root, plants known for their hallucinogenic and deliriant properties. The herb, in its raw, concentrated form, and particularly when consumed by an infant with an undeveloped brain, didn't merely soothe, it opened parts of the mind that adults feared. For an infant, whose perception of reality was still forming, whose world was a chaotic kaleidoscope of unfiltered sensory input, the herb stripped away all the nascent defenses of consciousness. It plunged the tiny mind into a terrifying maelstrom of uncontextualized sensory overload, visions without meaning, sounds without source, and emotions without understanding. The laughter that so tormented Oakhaven was not, Father Benedict realized with a chilling certainty, joy. It was the only primal, extreme vocalization a baby could produce in response to overwhelming, incomprehensible fear. It was terror without understanding. The infant's undeveloped brain, assaulted by a torrent of unprocessable hallucinations and stripped of its natural filters, could only react with a sustained, hysterical spasm, producing the sound of laughter while experiencing a hellish landscape of unfiltered dread. The baby was trapped, experiencing pure, unadulterated terror, unable to articulate, unable to escape, forced to vocalize its agony in the most horrifying way imaginable. The baby, tragically, eventually succumbed to exhaustion and dehydration, its relentless, mirthless laughter finally fading into an eternal silence that was more terrifying than its earlier sound. Its death, though a release from its torment, left a profound and lasting scar on the village of Oakhaven. The herb became utterly reviled, seen as truly demonic, its very name cursed. The old woman who had provided it vanished into the deeper woods, her wisdom now tainted with terrifying consequence. The family, forever haunted by the memory of their child's unending, terrified laughter, carried a grief that transcended normal sorrow, a knowledge of an innocence irrevocably shattered. The story became a chilling cautionary tale, whispered around hearths, a reminder of the dangerous, unseen forces that lurked even in the most seemingly benign corners of their natural world, capable of opening parts of the mind that even adults, with their frameworks of reason and faith, inherently feared to glimpse, understanding that some truths were too terrifying for the human psyche to bear. The air in the isolated, windowless chamber was perpetually thick, heavy with the cloying scent of stale opium and the bitter tang of dried wormwood, a suffocating perfume that clung to the rough-hewn stone walls and permeated the very fabric of the air itself. Here, in this deliberate darkness, lived a woman known only as the Black Eye, a name whispered with a potent mixture of dread and desperate hope throughout the villages nestled in the shadow of the brooding mountains. Her dwelling, a solitary hut tucked away from the prying eyes of the church and the clamor of common folk, was a destination for the desperate, those seeking lost loved ones, foreknowledge of famine, or grim truths about impending wars. The mystery around her eyes predated her blindness. Even in her youth, before the rituals began, there was a depth to them, an unsettling intensity that seemed to pierce through the ordinary, hinting at a sight beyond the mundane. She was a conduit to the unseen, a living oracle in a world starved for answers amidst plague, famine, and ceaseless conflict. Her prophecies, however, came at a terrible, irrevocable cost, exacted through a chilling ritual performed in the oppressive quiet of her sanctum. At the heart of the chamber lay a simple, unadorned wooden table, upon which rested a still, ebony-colored bowl crafted from polished volcanic rock, its surface holding a pool of black water often drawn from the deepest, coldest springs, believed to hold echoes of the earth's ancient memories. Into this obsidian mirror, she would carefully mix dried, powdered fragments of opium and wormwood. The opium, a potent derivative of the poppy, promised oblivion, dulling the relentless pain of a harsh existence and opening the mind to dreamlike states. Wormwood, intensely bitter and hallucinogenic, was known to provoke visions and vivid sensory distortions. As these substances dissolved into the black water, their essences permeated the chamber, creating the thick, strange-smelling air that clung to everything, subtly altering the very perception of reality before the ritual truly began. She would then lower her face to the surface of the black water, her gaze fixed, unblinking, upon its still, reflective depths, breathing deeply of the vapor that rose from the potent concoction, a silent invocation to the spirits of foresight. The visions came without warning, tearing through the veil of her consciousness like jagged shards of lightning. At first, they were small, mundane tragedies. A neighbor's cow falling ill, a distant cousin's unexpected death, a specific patch of wheat succumbing to blight. Her pronouncements were met with gasps of horror and awe, for they proved terrifyingly accurate, unfolding exactly as she described. Then, as her fame grew and her compulsion deepened, the visions escalated, becoming grander, more terrifying in their scope. She saw vast armies clashing on distant battlefields, heard the cries of dying men, witnessed cities ablaze, their stone walls crumbling. She foresaw the arrival of wars and deaths on a scale that transcended individual misfortune, seeing the terrifying sweep of plague across continents, the systematic fall of kingdoms, the vast, impersonal mechanisms of historical calamity. Each prophecy, each glimpse into the chilling certainty of the future, came with an agonizing price. For every time she saw something, she lost a bit of her sight. It began subtly, a faint blurring at the edges of her vision, a slight dimming of colors, barely perceptible at first. But with each subsequent descent into the black water, with each new terrifying truth revealed, her world grew progressively dimmer. The vibrant greens of the forest outside her window faded to muted browns, then to a monochrome landscape of gray. Faces became indistinct blurs, then mere shadows, until finally, the world around her plunged into an absolute, unyielding blackness. She was blind, her physical eyes forever shut to the world they once perceived, replaced by an inner vision that saw only the grim tapestry of fate. The emotional and psychological toll of this existence was immense, a profound and terrifying paradox. She lived with the agony of physical darkness, navigating her confined chamber by memory and touch alone, a silent, sightless prisoner in her own home. Yet, her inner eye saw all too clearly, burdened by the weight of terrifying truths she could not unsee. The pain of losing her physical sight was a constant, gnawing ache, balanced only by the compulsive, almost addictive, draw of the visions. The desire to know, to truly comprehend the hidden currents of destiny, became an insatiable hunger, overriding the agony of her physical deterioration. She carried the immense burden of foreknowledge, the terror of knowing that famine would claim familiar faces, that plague would ravage her own community, that wars would consume generations, and being utterly powerless to change any of it. Her clients, drawn by desperation, approached her with a mixture of reverent awe and profound fear, their faces unseen but their trembling voices conveying the terror of the truths she spoke. She became increasingly isolated, relying solely on her inner sight, her physical world shrinking to the confines of her chamber, her consciousness expanding to encompass the vast, horrifying tapestry of future events. The day she finally died was not marked by despair, but by a chilling, profound peace. She was utterly blind, her physical eyes withered, but her inner sight was ablaze, processing one final, all-encompassing vision. She had performed her ritual one last time, her trembling, withered fingers meticulously mixing the opium and wormwood into the black water. The chamber filled with the familiar, thick, strange-smelling smoke, a final, intoxicating embrace. She inhaled deeply, her face a mask of profound concentration, staring into the impenetrable blackness of the bowl, her vision now purely internal. What she saw in those final moments was not a mere future war or death, but something far grander, far more terrifyingly comprehensive. It was a cosmic understanding, a glimpse into the very fabric of time and destiny itself, the intricate, interwoven threads of cause and effect stretching from the dawn of creation to the end of all things. Her body, frail and wasted by years of penance and psychic exertion, finally gave out. She slumped over the bowl, her sightless eyes open, a faint, ethereal smile gracing her lips. She died blind, smiling. The scent of opium and wormwood lingered, clinging to the air, a silent testament to her final journey. Her body was discovered by her lone, terrified attendant, still warm, her face radiating an unsettling serenity. And from her lips, barely a whisper before the last breath escaped, came her final enigmatic words, delivered with a profound, terrifying certainty. "I saw it all." The phrase hung in the air, echoing through the silent chamber, haunting those who heard it. What did she mean? Not just her own life, or the immediate future, but everything. The past, the present, the intricate dance of destiny across all time. Was it the ultimate triumph of knowledge, a terrifying enlightenment achieved through forbidden means? Or was it the final, horrifying realization of a cosmic joke, a monstrous truth that brought a smile born not of joy, but of a profound, insane understanding of inevitable universal doom? The bowl of black water remained, still, reflective, a silent witness to a life consumed by forbidden knowledge, forever posing the unanswered question of whether her power was a divine blessing, a demonic curse, or simply the terrifying consequence of potent hallucinogens, leaving a chilling legacy in the haunted silence of her chamber. The wind, a mournful whisper through the skeletal branches of the ancient forest, carried the last sliver of weak winter sun towards the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows across the mouth of a hidden cave. It had been 7 years to the day since Brother Elias, a monk renowned for his fervent piety and an almost unsettling intensity in his spiritual pursuits, had sealed himself within that damp, unforgiving maw. He sought ultimate spiritual enlightenment, a divine communion so profound it could only be achieved through extreme asceticism, a radical renunciation of the world and its comforts. His vow was absolute. For 7 years, he would subsist only on what the cave and its immediate barren surroundings provided, the fungi that clung to its perpetually damp walls and the sparse moss that carpeted its cold, rocky floor. The monastery, fearful for his sanity and his life, had reluctantly permitted his isolation, marking his chosen cave with a simple, blessed cross, then leaving him to his terrifying solitude. The passage of time outside had transformed the world. Seasons had cycled through, famines had come and gone, and the silent threat of the Black Death had swept through lands. Yet, inside, Elias lived a life of profound deprivation, pushing the boundaries of human endurance against the consuming forces of hunger, cold, and the profound silence of true isolation. The cave itself was a perpetual twilight, a damp, echoing maw of cold stone, its air thick with the scent of wet earth and ancient fungi. His diet, rigorously adhered to, consisted only of mushrooms and moss. He learned to distinguish the edible from the poisonous, a grim, daily gamble that often led to bouts of agonizing nausea and unsettling visions. Yet he persevered, driven by an unwavering spiritual hunger. The mushrooms he consumed were a diverse, uncatalogued array. Some common, some rare, some possessing subtle, unknown properties that slowly, imperceptibly began to alter his very being. The moss, often thin and fibrous, provided meager sustenance, a bitter, earthy backdrop to the more potent fungi. 7 years passed. 7 years of profound silence, of gnawing hunger, of relentless cold, of a mind pushed to its absolute limits by starvation and the slow, insidious influence of his peculiar diet. The monastery had long since given him up for dead, another soul lost to the harsh embrace of ascetic zeal, another skeletal reminder of human fragility. Then, on a night as cold and clear as the one he had vanished into, a lone shepherd, guiding his flock through the desolate foothills near the monastery, saw a light. It was faint, almost imperceptible against the profound darkness, but it was there, emanating from the mouth of the forbidden cave. Trembling, fearing a demonic presence, he approached, drawn by an irresistible curiosity. What he found filled him with a terror that rooted him to the spot. Brother Elias, gaunt to the point of emaciation, his eyes sunk deep into their sockets but holding an unnerving, almost incandescent glow, stood at the cave's entrance. He was alive. His skin, impossibly thin and translucent, radiated a faint ethereal light in the night, a soft, pulsing luminescence that seemed to emanate from within his very being. It was not a reflection. It was a pure, steady glow, turning his emaciated form into a spectral beacon against the oppressive darkness. The shepherd, convinced he was witnessing a miracle, or perhaps a holy apparition, fell to his knees, utterly speechless. News of the glowing monk spread like wildfire, drawing pilgrims and the curious from across the land. The monastery, initially skeptical, was forced to acknowledge the undeniable. Brother Elias had returned. He was brought back to his cell, though his light persisted, a constant, otherworldly glow. When he finally spoke, his voice was thin, reedy, yet imbued with an unsettling clarity. He spoke not of suffering or of physical hardship, but of profound, cosmic revelations. He said he had seen the garden at the end of time. His words were abstract, ethereal, describing a place of ultimate truth, a synthesis of all knowledge, a realm where time itself dissolved into a single, eternal present. It was a vision of profound peace, terrifying in its scope, a place where all questions were answered and all suffering ceased. He claimed his light was a sign of this ultimate communion, a divine glow bestowed upon him by the angels who had guided him through the final, transcendent moments of his spiritual journey. To the devout, he was immediately proclaimed a living saint, his luminescence a visible miracle, a testament to God's boundless grace and his unparalleled sanctity. Pilgrims flocked to the monastery, seeking blessings, hoping to glimpse the holy glow, convinced they stood before a true man of God, one who had touched the divine. Yet, even amidst the fervent belief, the mystery of Brother Elias continued to burn with its own silent intensity. Scientists today still debate how he survived his self-imposed ordeal. 7 years on a diet of only mushrooms and moss should have led to severe malnutrition, organ failure, and inevitable death. What hidden nutrients did he find? Did some unknown metabolic adaptation occur within his body? And the glow, that was the ultimate enigma. What caused the bioluminescence? Was it, as some medieval scholars debated, a manifestation of pure divine energy, a soul so pure it radiated light? Or was there a physical, biological explanation that escaped their understanding? Modern scientists, looking back, consider possibilities. Did he consume specific varieties of bioluminescent fungi that, through some unknown metabolic process, colonized his body or produced light-emitting compounds within his system? Or perhaps a rare type of bacteria, feeding on his unique diet and internal conditions, had colonized him, creating a symbiotic glow? Could his extreme asceticism, combined with specific chemicals in certain mushrooms, have triggered a unique biochemical reaction within his cells, leading to a form of human phosphorescence? And the vision of the garden at the end of time, was it a genuine mystical experience or a profound spiritual hallucination induced by psychotropic mushrooms? Many varieties are highly hallucinogenic and severe, prolonged malnutrition, a mind pushed beyond its limits experiencing a terrifying yet beautiful descent into altered reality? Brother Elias lived for several more years, his faint, eerie glow never fading, a constant, living mystery. He never sought comfort, speaking only of his visions, his spirit seemingly detached from the mundane world. His death was peaceful, his light simply dimming like a candle reaching its end, leaving behind a profound legacy of awe and an enduring, scientific puzzle. The monastery, forever marked by his miraculous return, continued to grapple with the profound questions he left behind. The cave remains, silent, damp, holding its secrets. The scientific debate continues, unable to definitively explain the miraculous bioluminescence or the profound survival of a man who consumed only the humblest elements of the earth. His story remains a haunting testament to the thin veil between the physical and the spiritual, the known and the unknown, forever asking whether his light was of God, of biology, or of a profound journey into the very depths of a mind pushed beyond all human limits. In the suffocating intellectual climate of the medieval era, where the shadow of the Holy Church stretched long and absolute over every thought, every whispered doubt, there existed no greater sin, no more terrifying heresy, than to question the divine, to even contemplate a world without God. It was a concept so utterly anathema, so profoundly destructive to the very fabric of society and salvation, that merely pondering it could condemn a soul to eternal damnation and a body to the pyre. Yet, within this rigid framework, human minds, restless and tormented, sometimes dared to stray into forbidden territories. Deep within the hidden, dust-choked archives of a forgotten monastery, a chilling artifact of such forbidden thought lay concealed, a thin, brittle manuscript, meticulously penned by the hand of a heretic monk, Brother Anselm, a soul consumed by existential torment and a desperate quest for ultimate truth. His forbidden text, bound in plain, unmarked leather, whispered of a plant so terrifyingly potent, so utterly subversive to the very essence of human existence, that he claimed it erased the idea of God from the mind. He named it, in a chillingly poetic flourish, the Mind Widow. Brother Anselm, a scholar whose piety had slowly eroded under the relentless weight of doubt and the cold indifference of the cosmos, had, according to his forbidden text, dedicated years to the study of esoteric botanicals, seeking not enlightenment, but cessation. He meticulously detailed the plant's appearance. A vine with dark, serrated leaves and small, almost black berries, its tendrils seeming to coil with an unnatural vitality. But it was its effect, rendered in Anselm's shaky, feverish script, that truly horrified. Consumed in a specific ritualistic manner, perhaps a crushed powder, a potent infusion, or a distilled essence, the plant began its insidious work not on the body, but on the very scaffolding of the human soul. Initially, users reported a profound sense of peace, a sudden cessation of anxiety, and a liberation from earthly concerns. This quickly deepened into an unsettling detachment, a serene indifference that masked a terrifying inner void. Then the erosion began. The first to vanish was religion. Not just belief in specific dogma, but the fundamental idea of a divine creator, a spiritual purpose, a cosmic order. The user would find their deepest convictions, their most fervent prayers, their very concept of the sacred, simply gone, replaced by a profound, terrifying emptiness, a void where spiritual certainty once resided. The anchor of faith, which had sustained medieval man through every famine, every plague, every war, simply dissolved, leaving them adrift in a meaningless universe. But the Mind Widow's terrifying work did not stop there. Once faith was erased, the self began to unravel. Users would slowly, agonizingly, forget their identity. Their names, their histories, their relationships, their very sense of who they were as individuals, all would recede into a featureless blankness. The complexities of memory, the intricate tapestry of personal experience that defines selfhood, would be reduced to a vast, empty expanse. They would stare blankly, their eyes devoid of recognition, their past a sealed book. This profound self-erasure left them as living husks, stripped of all personal context, terrifyingly anonymous even to themselves. And then, the final, most horrifying stage of its insidious influence, the slow, agonizing dissolution of communication itself. The Mind Widow consumed not just the soul and the self, but the very tools of human interaction. Users would inexorably forget language. Words would lose their meaning. Sentences would become garbled nonsense. The intricate grammar of thought would collapse into an incomprehensible jumble of sounds. They would babble, utter guttural cries, or fall into an eerie, profound silence, utterly isolated in a void from which no communication could escape or enter. The ultimate horror was not death, but a living oblivion, a conscious existence stripped of all that made one human: faith, identity, and the ability to connect. They became vacant, breathing vessels, their minds annihilated, their former selves utterly erased. This was the true terror of the Mind Widow, a complete annihilation of the human spirit, reducing a complex being to a mindless, terrifying void, a true spiritual death long before the body ceased to breathe. For centuries, the terrifying insights of Brother Anselm remained hidden, a dangerous whisper in a forgotten text, and the plant itself became a thing of dark legend. The Church, fiercely efficient in its purges of heresy, would have undoubtedly sought out and destroyed any known samples of the Mind Widow, ensuring that its blasphemous power could never again threaten the spiritual foundations of Christendom. And so, for generation after generation, the terrifying plant was believed to exist only in the fevered imaginings of a tormented monk, a terrifying thought experiment. No samples remained, or so it was devoutly hoped and meticulously ensured, rendering its existence a chilling historical footnote, its power a theoretical horror. But the wheel of time grinds slowly, and the earth holds its secrets with a patience that defies human memory. In the quiet, unassuming periphery of a remarkably preserved medieval monastic garden in rural France, a place meticulously maintained through centuries of care, a strange botanical anomaly persisted, overlooked by countless generations of gardeners and scholars. It was a vine, vigorous and resilient, sprawling with a subtle, almost unnatural tenacity, its dark, serrated leaves and small, black, unappetizing berries strangely familiar to a few who had ever glimpsed illustrations in forbidden botanical texts. Modern botanists, meticulously studying the ancient records and the surviving flora of the garden, began to notice the vine's unique characteristics, its unusual resilience to blight, its strange, almost unsettlingly quiet growth. Then, a dedicated researcher, unearthing the long-hidden manuscript of Brother Anselm, stumbled upon its meticulously drawn illustrations of the Mind Widow. The shock, when she finally compared the detailed sketches in the ancient text to the living specimen in the garden, was profound, chilling her to the bone. The drawings, so precise in their terrifying detail, matched the strange, unnamed vine in the medieval garden perfectly. And, more terrifyingly, it's still alive. The implications of this silent discovery sent a shiver through the hallowed halls of academia and into the hushed debates of theological scholars. The God-killing plant, the very embodiment of existential dread, was not a mere legend, not a theoretical horror confined to a heretic's fevered imagination. It was real. It had survived the purges, the neglect, the centuries of human oblivion, silently thriving, its dark essence potent and undiminished. The questions it posed were terrifyingly immediate. What if its properties were rediscovered? What if its power were unleashed upon a world that had, ironically, become increasingly secular, yet still clung to the fabric of identity and language? The temptation to study it, to understand its neurochemical mechanisms, was immense, but so too was the profound fear of its ultimate, terrifying capability to unravel the very essence of human consciousness. Its continued existence in that quiet, sun-dappled French garden, its dark tendrils seemingly innocuous, serves as a chilling, living testament to the enduring presence of profound danger in the world, a constant, silent question mark hanging over the fragility of human belief, identity, and the intricate web of language. The plant that killed God, it seems, still lives, silently waiting, its ultimate power a profound, terrifying whisper in the quiet corners of our modern world.